Chapter 15. I gave him the eye. The evening had begun to draw in a bit by now, and the visibility in consequence wasn't so hot, but there still remained ample light to enable me to see him clearly. And what I saw convinced me that I should be a lot easier in my mind with a stout rustic bench between us. I rose, accordingly, modelling my style on that of a rocketing pheasant, and proceeded to deposit myself on the other side of the object named. My prompt agility was not without its effect. He seemed somewhat taken aback. He came to a halt, and for about the space of time required to allow a bead of perspire to trickle from the top of the brow to the tip of the nose, stood gazing at me in silence. "So," he said at length, and it came as a complete surprise to me that fellows ever really do say "so." I'd always thought it was just a thing you read in books, like "quotha," I mean to say, or "odds bodkins," or even "bagum." Still, there it was. Quaint or not quaint, bizarre or not bizarre, he said so, and it was up to me to cope with the situation on those lines. It would have been a duller man than Bertram Wooster who'd failed to note that the dear old chap was a bit steamed up. Whether his eyes were actually shooting forth flame I couldn't tell you, but there appeared to me to be a distinct incandescence. For the rest, his fists were clenched, his ears quivering, and the muscles of his jaw rotating rhythmically, as if he were making an early supper of something. His hair was full of twigs, and there was a beetle hanging to the side of his head, which would have interested Gussie Finknottle. To this, however, I paid scant attention. There is a time for studying beetles, and a time for not studying beetles. "So," he said again. Now, those who know Bertram Wooster best will tell you that he's always at his shrewdest and most level-headed in moments of peril. Who was it who, when gripped by the arm of the law on boat race night not so many years ago and hauled off to Vine Street Police Station, assumed in a flash the identity of Eustace H. Plimsoll of the Laburnums, Allen Road, West Dulwich, thus saving the grand old name of Wooster from being dragged in the mire and avoiding wide publicity of the wrong sort? Who was it? But I need not labour the point. My record speaks for itself. 3 times pinched, but never once sentenced under the correct label. Ask anyone at the drones about this. So now, in a situation threatening to become every moment more scaly, I didn't lose my head. I preserved the old sang-froid. Smiling a genial and affectionate smile, and hoping that it wasn't too dark for it to register, I spoke with a jolly cordiality. "Why, hello, Tuppy, you there?" He said yes, he was there. "Been here long?" "I have." "Fine. I wanted to see you." "Well, here I am. Come out from behind that bench." "No thanks, old man. I like leaning on it. It seems to rest the spine." "In about 2 seconds," said Tuppy, "I'm going to kick your spine up through the top of your head." I raised the eyebrows. Not much good, of course, in that light, but it seemed to help the general composition. "Is this Hildebrand Glossop speaking?" I said. He replied that it was, adding that if I wanted to make sure I might move a few feet over in his direction. He also called me an opprobrious name. I raised the eyebrows again. Come, Tuppy, don't let us let this little chat become acrid." "Is acrid the word I want?" "I couldn't say," he replied, beginning to sidle round the bench. I saw that anything I might wish to say must be said quickly. Already he had sidled some 6 feet, and though by dint of sidling, too, I had managed to keep the bench between us, who could predict how long this happy state of affairs would last? I came to the point, therefore. "I think I know what's on your mind, Tuppy," I said. "If you were in those bushes during my conversation with the recent Angela, I dare say you heard what I was saying about you?" "I did." "I see. Well, we won't go into the ethics of the thing. Eavesdropping, some people might call it, and I can imagine stern critics drawing in the breath to some extent. Considering it, I don't want to hurt your feelings, Tuppy, but considering it un-English, a bit un-English, Tuppy, old man, you must admit." "I'm Scotch." "Really?" I said. "I never knew that before. Rummy how you don't suspect a man of being Scotch unless he's Mac something and says 'och aye' and things like that." "I wonder," I went on, feeling that an academic discussion on some neutral topic might ease the tension, "if you can tell me something that has puzzled me a good deal. What exactly is it that they put into haggis? I've often wondered about that." From the fact that his only response to the question was to leap over the bench and make a grab at me, I gathered that his mind was not on the haggis. "However," I said, leaping over the bench in my turn, "that is a side issue. If, to come back to it, you were in those bushes and heard what I was saying about you—" He began to move round the bench in a northeasterly direction. I followed his example, setting a course south-southwest. "No doubt you were surprised at the way I was talking?" "Not a bit." "What? Did nothing strike you as odd in the tone of my remarks?" "It was just the sort of stuff I should have expected a treacherous, sneaking hound like you to say." "My dear chap," I protested, "this is not your usual form. A bit slow in the uptake, surely? I should have thought you would have spotted right away that it was all part of a well-laid plan." "I'll get you in a jiffy," said Tuppy, recovering his balance after a swift clutch at my neck. And so probable did this seem that I delayed no longer, but hastened to place all the facts before him. Speaking rapidly and keeping moving, I related my emotions on receipt of Aunt Dahlia's telegram, my instant rush to the scene of the disaster, my meditations in the car, and the eventual framing of this well-laid plan of mine. I spoke clearly and well, and it was with considerable concern, consequently, that I heard him observe between clenched teeth, which made it worse, that he didn't believe a damned word of it. "But, Tuppy," I said, "why not? To me the thing rings true to the last drop. What makes you sceptical? Confide in me, Tuppy." He halted and stood, taking a breather. Tuppy, pungently though Angela might have argued to the contrary, is not really fat. During the winter months you'll find him constantly booting the football with merry shouts, and in the summer the tennis racket is seldom out of his hand. But at the recently concluded evening meal, feeling no doubt that after that painful scene in the larder there was nothing to be gained by further abstinence, he'd rather let himself go, and, as it were, made up leeway, and after really immersing himself in one of Anatole's dinners, a man of his sturdy build tends to lose elasticity a bit. During the exposition of my plans for his happiness, a certain animation had crept into this round and round the mulberry bush jamboree of ours, so much so, indeed, that for the last few minutes we might have been a rather oversized greyhound and a somewhat slimmer electric hare doing their stuff on a circular track for the entertainment of the many-headed. This, it appeared, had taken it out of him a bit, and I wasn't displeased. I was feeling the strain myself, and welcomed a lull. "It absolutely beats me why you don't believe it," I said. "You know we've been pals for years. You must be aware that, except at the moment when you caused me to do a nosedive into the drone swimming bath, an incident which I long since decided to put out of my mind and let the dead past bury its dead about, if you follow what I mean, except on that one occasion, as I say, I've always regarded you with the utmost esteem. Why then, if not for the motives I have outlined, should I knock you to Angela? Answer me that. Be very careful." "What do you mean, be very careful?" "Well, as a matter of fact, I didn't quite know myself. It was what the magistrate had said to me on the occasion when I stood in the dock as Eustace Plimsoll of the Laburnums. And as it had impressed me a good deal at the time, I just bunged it in now by way of giving the conversation a tone. All right, never mind about being careful, then. Just answer me that question. Why, if I hadn't your interests sincerely at heart, should I have ticked you off as stated?" A sharp spasm shook him from base to apex. The beetle, which, during the recent exchanges, had been clinging to his head, hoping for the best, gave it up at this and resigned office. It shot off and was swallowed in the night. "Ah," I said. "Your beetle," I explained. "No doubt you were unaware of it, but all this while there's been a beetle of sorts parked on the side of your head. You have now dislodged it." He snorted. "Beetles!" "Not beetles. One beetle only." "I like your crust," cried Tuppy, vibrating like one of Gussie's newts during the courting season. "Talking of beetles when all the time you know you're a treacherous, sneaking hound." It was a debatable point, of course, why treacherous sneaking hounds should be considered ineligible to talk about beetles, and I dare say a good cross-examining counsel would have made quite a lot of it, but I let it go. "That's the second time you've called me that, and," I said firmly, "I insist on an explanation. I've told you that I acted throughout from the best and kindliest motives in roasting you to Angela. It cut me to the quick to have to speak like that, and only the recollection of our lifelong friendship would have made me do it. And now you say you don't believe me and call me names for which I'm not sure I couldn't have you up before a beacon jury and mulcted you in very substantial damages. I should have to consult my solicitor, of course, but it would surprise me very much if an action did not lie. Be reasonable, Tuppy. Suggest another motive I could have had. Just one." "I will. Do you think I don't know? You're in love with Angela yourself." "What? And you knocked me in order to poison her mind against me and finally remove me from your path." I'd never heard anything so absolutely loopy in my life. "Why, dash it, I've known Angela since she was so high. You don't fall in love with close relations you've known since they were so high. Besides, isn't there something in the Book of Rules about a man may not marry his cousin, or am I thinking of grandmothers?" "Tuppy, my dear old ass," I cried, "this is pure banana oil. You've come unscrewed." "Oh, yes. Me in love with Angela? Ha, ha! You can't get out of it with any ha-has. She called you darling." "I know, and I disapproved. This habit of the younger G of scattering darlings about like birdseed is one that I deprecate. Lax is how I should describe it. You tickled her ankles. In a purely cousinly spirit, it didn't mean a thing. Why, dash it, you must know that in the deeper and truer sense I wouldn't touch Angela with a barge pole." "Oh? And why not? Not good enough for you?" "You misunderstand me," I hastened to reply. "When I say I wouldn't touch Angela with a barge pole, I intend merely to convey that my feelings towards her are those of distant, though cordial, esteem. In other words, you may rest assured that between this young prune and myself there never has been, and never could be, any sentiment warmer and stronger than that of ordinary friendship. I believe it was you who tipped her off that I was in the larder last night, so that she could find me there with that pie, thus damaging my prestige." "My dear Tuppy, a Wooster?" I was shocked. "You think a Wooster would do that?" He breathed heavily. "Listen," he said. "It's no good your standing there arguing. You can't get away from the facts. Somebody stole her from me at Cannes. You told me yourself that she was with you all the time at Cannes and hardly saw anybody else. You gloated over the mixed bathing and those moonlight walks you had together. Not gloated, just mentioned them. So now you understand why, as soon as I can get clear of this damned bench, I'm going to tear you limb from limb." "Why they have these bally benches in gardens," said Tuppy discontentedly, "is more than I can see. They only get in the way." He ceased and, grabbing out, missed me by a hair's breadth. It was a moment for swift thinking, and it is at such moments, as I've already indicated, that Bertram Wooster is at his best. I suddenly remembered the recent misunderstanding with the Basset, and with a flash of clear vision saw that this was where it was going to come in handy. "You've got it all wrong, Tuppy," I said, moving to the left. "True, I saw a lot of Angela, but my dealings with her were on a basis from start to finish of the purest and most wholesome camaraderie. I can prove it. During that sojourn in Cannes, my affections were engaged elsewhere." "What? Engaged elsewhere? My affections during that sojourn?" I had struck the right note. He stopped, sidling. His clutching hand fell to his side. "Is that true? Quite official." "Who was she?" "My dear Tuppy, does one bandy a woman's name?" "One does if one doesn't want one's ruddy head pulled off." I saw that it was a special case. "Madeline Basset," I said. "Who? Madeline Basset?" He seemed stunned. You stand there and tell me you were in love with that Bassett disaster? I wouldn't call her that Bassett disaster, Tuppy. Not respectful. Dash being respectful. I want facts. You deliberately assert that you love that weird God-helpers. I don't see why you should call her a weird God-helpers either. A very charming and beautiful girl. Odd in some of her views, perhaps. One doesn't quite see eye to eye with her in the matter of stars and rabbits, but not a weird God help us. Anyway, you stick to it that you were in love with her? I do. It sounds thin to me, Wooster. Very thin. I saw that it would be necessary to apply the finishing touch. I must ask you to treat this as entirely confidential, Glossop, but I may as well inform you that it is not 24 hours since she turned me down. Turned you down? Like a bedspread, in this very garden. 24 hours? Call it 25. So you'll readily see that I can't be the chap, if any, who stole Angela from you at Cannes. And I was on the brink of adding that I wouldn't touch Angela with a barge pole when I remembered I'd said it already, and it hadn't gone frightfully well. I desisted, therefore. My manly frankness seemed to be producing good results. The homicidal glare was dying out of Tuppy's eyes. He had the aspect of a hired assassin who had paused to think things over. "I see," he said at length. "All right, then. Sorry you were troubled." "Don't mention it, old man," I responded courteously. For the first time since the bushes had begun to pour forth glossops, Bertram Wooster could be said to have breathed freely. I don't say I actually came out from behind the bench, but I did let go of it, and with something of the relief which those 3 chaps in the Old Testament must have experienced after sliding out of the burning fiery furnace, I even groped tentatively for my cigarette case. The next moment a sudden snort made me take my fingers off it, as if it had bitten me. I was distressed to note in the old friend a return of the recent frenzy. "What the hell did you mean by telling her that I used to be covered with ink when I was a kid?" "My dear Tuppy, I was almost finickingly careful about my personal cleanliness as a boy. You could have eaten your dinner off me." "Quite, but... and all that stuff about having no soul. I'm crawling with soul, and being looked on as an outsider at the drones." "But, my dear old chap, I explained that. It was all part of my ruse or scheme." "It was it? Well, in future, do me a favour and leave me out of your foul ruses." "Just as you say, old boy." "All right, then. That's understood." He relapsed into silence, standing with folded arms, staring before him rather like a strong, silent man in a novel when he's just been given the bird by the girl, and is thinking of looking in at the Rocky Mountains and bumping off a few bears. His manifest pippedness excited my compassion, and I ventured a kindly word. "I don't suppose you know what au pied de la lettre means, Tuppy? But that's how I don't think you ought to take all that stuff Angela was saying just now too much." He seemed interested. "What the devil are you talking about?" he asked. I saw that I should have to make myself clearer. "Don't take all that guff of hers too literally, old man. You know what girls are like." "I do," he said, with another snort that came straight up from his insteps, "and I wish I'd never met one." "I mean to say, it's obvious that she must have spotted you in those bushes and was simply talking to score off you. There you were, I mean, if you follow the psychology, and she saw you, and in that impulsive way girls have, she seized the opportunity of ribbing you a bit. Just told you a few home truths, I mean to say." "Home truths? That's right." He snorted once more, causing me to feel rather like royalty receiving a 21-gun salute from the fleet. I can't remember ever having met a better right and left-hand snorter. "What do you mean, home truths? I'm not fat." No. "And what's wrong with the colour of my hair?" "Quite in order, Tuppy, old man. The hair, I mean." "And I'm not a bit thin on the top. What the dickens are you grinning about?" "Not grinning, just smiling slightly. I was conjuring up a sort of vision, if you know what I mean, of you as seen through Angela's eyes, fat in the middle and thin on the top. Rather funny." "You think it funny, do you?" Not a bit. You'd better not. Quite." It seemed to me that the conversation was becoming difficult again. I wished it could be terminated, and so it was, for at this moment something came shimmering through the laurels in the quiet even fall, and I perceived that it was Angela. She was looking sweet and saint-like, and she had a plate of sandwiches in her hand. Ham, I was to discover later. "If you see Mr. Glossop anywhere, Bertie," she said, her eyes resting dreamily on Tuppy's facade, "I wish you would give him these. I'm so afraid he may be hungry, poor fellow. It's nearly 10 o'clock, and he hasn't eaten a morsel since dinner. I'll just leave them on this bench." She pushed off, and it seemed to me that I might as well go with her. Nothing to keep me there, I mean. We moved towards the house, and presently from behind us there sounded in the night the splintering crash of a well-kicked plate of ham sandwiches, accompanied by the muffled oaths of a strong man in his wrath. "How still and peaceful everything is," said Angela. Chapter 16. Sunshine was gilding the grounds of Brinkley Court, and the ear detected a marked twittering of birds in the ivy outside the window when I awoke next morning to a new day. But there was no corresponding sunshine in Bertram Wooster's soul, and no answering twitter in his heart as he sat up in bed sipping his cup of strengthening tea. It couldn't be denied that to Bertram, reviewing the happenings of the previous night, the Tuppy-Angela situation seemed more or less to have slipped a cog. With every desire to look for the silver lining, I couldn't but feel that the rift between these two haughty spirits had now reached such impressive proportions that the task of bridging same would be beyond even my powers. I am a shrewd observer, and there'd been something in Tuppy's manner as he booted that plate of ham sandwiches that seemed to tell me that he would not lightly forgive. In these cirques I deemed it best to shelve their problem for the nonce, and turn the mind to the matter of Gussie, which presented a brighter picture. With regard to Gussie, everything was in train. Jeeves's morbid scruples about lacing the chap's orange juice had put me to a good deal of trouble, but I had surmounted every obstacle in the old Worcester way. I had secured an abundance of the necessary spirit, and it was now lying in its flask in the drawer of the dressing-table. I had also ascertained that the jug, duly filled, would be standing on a shelf in the butler's pantry round about the hour of 1. To remove it from that shelf, sneak it up to my room, and return it, laced in good time for the midday meal, would be a task calling, no doubt, for address, but in no sense an exacting one. It was with something of the emotions of one preparing a treat for a deserving child that I finished my tea and rolled over for that extra spot of sleep which just makes all the difference when there's a man's work to be done and the brain must be kept clear for it. And when I came downstairs an hour or so later, I knew how right I'd been to formulate this scheme for Gussie's bucking up. I ran into him on the lawn, and I could see at a glance that if ever there was a man who needed a snappy stimulant, it was he. All nature, as I've indicated, was smiling, but not Augustus Finknottle. He was walking round in circles, muttering something about not proposing to detain us long, but on this auspicious occasion feeling compelled to say a few words. "Ah, Gussie," I said, arresting him as he was about to start another lap. "A lovely morning, is it not?" Even if I hadn't been aware of it already, I could have divined from the abruptness with which he damned the lovely morning that he was not in a merry mood. I addressed myself to the task of bringing the roses back to his cheeks. "I've got good news for you, Gussie." He looked at me with a sudden, sharp interest. "Has Market Snodsbury Grammar School burned down?" "Not that I know of." "Have mumps broken out? Is the place closed on account of measles?" No. "Then what do you mean you've got good news?" I endeavoured to soothe. "You mustn't take it so hard, Gussie. Why worry about a laughably simple job like distributing prizes at a school?" "Laughably simple, eh? Do you realize I've been sweating for days and haven't been able to think of a thing to say yet, except that I won't detain them long." "You bet I won't detain them long." "What the devil am I to say, Bertie? What do you say when you're distributing prizes?" I considered. Once, at my private school, I'd won a prize for scripture knowledge, so I suppose I ought to have been full of inside stuff, but memory eluded me. Then something emerged from the mists. "You say the race is not always to the swift." "Why?" "Well, it's a good gag. It generally gets a hand." "I mean, why isn't it? Why isn't the race to the swift?" "Ha! There you have me. But the nibs say it isn't." "And what does it mean?" "Well, I take it it's supposed to console the chaps who haven't won prizes." "What's the good of that to me? I'm not worrying about them. It's the ones who've won prizes that I'm worrying about, the little blighters who'll come up on the platform." "Suppose they make faces at me." "They won't." "How do you know they won't?" "It's probably the first thing they'll think of, and even if they don't, Bertie, shall I tell you something?" "What?" "I've a good mind to take that tip of yours and have a drink." I smiled subtly. He little knew about summed up what I was thinking. "Oh, you'll be all right," I said. He became fevered again. "How do you know I'll be all right? I'm sure to blow up in my lines." "Tush!" "Or drop a prize." "Tut!" "Or something. I can feel it in my bones. As sure as I'm standing here, something is going to happen this afternoon which will make everybody laugh themselves sick at me. I can hear them now, like hyenas. Bertie!" "Hello? Do you remember that kid's school we went to before Eton?" "Quite. I was there. I won my scripture prize." "Never mind about your scripture prize. I'm not talking about your scripture prize. Do you recollect the Boscher incident?" I did indeed. It was one of the high spots of my youth. "Major General Sir Wilfrid Boscher came to distribute the prizes at that school," proceeded Gussie in a dull, toneless voice. "He dropped a book, he stooped to pick it up, and as he stooped, his trousers split up the back. How we roared!" Gussie's face twisted. "We did, little swine that we were. Instead of remaining silent and exhibiting a decent sympathy for a gallant officer at a particularly embarrassing moment, we howled and yelled with mirth, I loudest of any. That's what will happen to me this afternoon, Bertie. It'll be a judgment on me for laughing like that at Major General Sir Wilfrid Boscher." "No, no, Gussie, old man, your trousers won't split." "How do you know they won't? Better men than I have split their trousers. General Boscher was a DSO, with a fine record of service on the northwestern frontier of India, and his trousers split." "I shall be a mockery and a scorn, I know it. And you, fully cognizant of what I'm in for, come babbling about good news. What news could possibly be good to me at this moment, except the information that bubonic plague had broken out among the scholars of Market Snodsbury Grammar School, and that they were all confined to their beds with spots?" The moment had come for me to speak. I laid a hand gently on his shoulder. He brushed it off. I laid it on again. He brushed it off once more. I was endeavouring to lay it on for the third time when he moved aside and desired, with a certain petulance, to be informed if I thought I was a ruddy osteopath. I found his manner trying, but one has to make allowances. I was telling myself that I should be seeing a very different Gussie after lunch. When I said I had good news, old man, I meant about Madeline Bassett. The febrile gleam died out of his eyes, to be replaced by a look of infinite sadness. "You can't have good news about her. I've dished myself there completely." "Not at all. I'm convinced that if you take another whack at her, all will be well." And, keeping it snappy, I related what had passed between the Bassett and myself on the previous night. "So all you have to do is play a return date, and you can't fail to swing the voting. You are her dream man." He shook his head. "No." "What?" "No use." "What do you mean?" "Not a bit of good trying." "But I tell you," she said in so many words, "it doesn't make any difference. She may have loved me once. Last night will have killed all that." "Of course it won't." "It will. She despises me now." "Not a bit of it. She knows you simply got cold feet." "And I should get cold feet if I tried again. It's no good, Bertie. I'm hopeless, and there's an end to it. Fate made me the sort of chap who can't say boo to a goose." "Well, it isn't a question of saying boo to a goose. The point doesn't arise at all. It's simply a matter of—" I know, but it's no good. I can't do it. The whole thing is off." I'm not going to risk a repetition of last night's fiasco. You talk in a light way of taking another whack at her, but you don't know what it means. You haven't been through the experience of starting to ask the girl you love to marry you, and then suddenly finding yourself talking about the plume-like external gills of the newly born newt. It's not a thing you can do twice. No, I accept my destiny. It's all over. Now, Bertie, like a good chap, shove off. I want to compose my speech. I can't compose my speech with you mucking around. If you're going to continue to muck around, at least give me a couple of stories. Little hellhounds are sure to expect a story or two. Do you know the one about... No good. I don't want any of your off-colour stuff from the drone smoking room. I need something clean. Something that will be a help to them in their afterlives. Not that I care a damn about their afterlives, except that I hope they'll all choke. I heard a story the other day. I can't remember it, but it was about a chap who snored and disturbed the neighbours, and it was his adenoids that adenoid them. He made a weary gesture. You expect me to work that in, do you, into a speech to be delivered to an audience of boys, every one of whom is probably riddled with adenoids? Damn it, they'd rush the platform. Leave me, Bertie. Push off. That's all I ask you to do. Push off. Ladies and gentlemen, said Gussie in a low, soliloquizing sort of way, I don't propose to detain this auspicious occasion long. It was the thoughtful Wooster who walked away and left him at it. More than ever I was congratulating myself on having had the sterling good sense to make all my arrangements so that I could press a button and set things moving at an instant's notice. Until now, you see, I'd rather entertained a sort of hope that when I'd revealed to him the Bassett's mental attitude, nature would have done the rest, bracing him up to such an extent that artificial stimulants would not be required. Because, naturally, a chap doesn't want to have to sprint about country houses lugging jugs of orange juice, unless it's absolutely essential. But now I saw that I must carry on as planned. The total absence of pep, ginger, and the right spirit which the man had displayed during these conversational exchanges convinced me that the strongest measures would be necessary. Immediately upon leaving him, therefore, I proceeded to the pantry, waited till the butler had removed himself elsewhere, and nipped in and secured the vital jug. A few moments later, after a wary passage of the stairs, I was in my room, and the first thing I saw there was Jeeves fooling about with trousers. He gave the jug a look which, wrongly, as it was to turn out, I diagnosed as censorious. I drew myself up a bit. I intended to have no rot from the fellow. Yes, Jeeves? Sir. You have the air of one about to make a remark, Jeeves. Oh, no, sir. I note that you are in possession of Mr. Finknottle's orange juice. I was merely about to observe that, in my opinion, it would be injudicious to add spirit to it. That is a remark, Jeeves, and it is precisely because I have already attended to the matter, sir. What? Yes, sir. I decided, after all, to acquiesce in your wishes. I stared at the man, astounded. I was deeply moved. Well, I mean, wouldn't any chap who'd been going about thinking that the old feudal spirit was dead and then suddenly found it wasn't have been deeply moved? Jeeves, I said, I am touched. Thank you, sir. Touched and gratified. Thank you very much, sir. But what caused this change of heart? I chanced to encounter Mr. Finknottle in the garden, sir, while you were still in bed, and we had a brief conversation. And you came away feeling that he needed a bracer? Very much so, sir. His attitude struck me as defeatist. I nodded. I felt the same. Defeatist sums it up to a nicety. Did you tell him his attitude struck you as defeatist? Yes, sir. But it didn't do any good? No, sir. Very well then, Jeeves, we must act. How much gin did you put in the jug? A liberal tumblerful, sir. Would that be a normal dose for an adult defeatist, do you think? I fancy it should prove adequate, sir. I wonder. We mustn't spoil the ship for a halfpennyworth of tar. I think I'll add just another fluid ounce or so. I would not advocate it, sir. In the case of Lord Brancaster's parrot, you're falling into your old error, Jeeves, of thinking that Gussie is a parrot. Fight against this. I shall add the Oz. Very good, sir. And, by the way, Jeeves, Mr. Finknottle is in the market for bright, clean stories to use in his speech. Do you know any? I know a story about two Irishmen, sir. Pat and Mike? Yes, sir. Who are walking along Broadway? Yes, sir. Just what he wants. Any more? No, sir. Well, every little helps. You'd better go and tell it to him. Very good, sir. He passed from the room, and I unscrewed the flask and tilted into the jug a generous modicum of its contents. And scarcely had I done so when there came to my ears the sound of footsteps without. I'd only just time to shove the jug behind the photograph of Uncle Tom on the mantelpiece before the door opened, and in came Gussie, curveting like a circus horse. "What-ho, Bertie?" he said. "What-ho, what-ho, what-ho? And again, what-ho? What a beautiful world this is, Bertie. One of the nicest I ever met." I stared at him, speechless. We Woosters are as quick as lightning, and I saw at once that something had happened. I mean to say, I told you about him walking around in circles. I recorded what passed between us on the lawn, and if I portrayed the scene with anything like adequate skill, the picture you will have retained of this Finknottle will have been that of a nervous wreck, sagging at the knees, green about the gills, and picking feverishly at the lapels of his coat in an ecstasy of craven fear. In a word, defeatist. Gussie, during that interview, had, in fine, exhibited all the earmarks of one licked to a custard. Vastly different was the Gussie who stood before me now. Self-confidence seemed to ooze from the fellow's every pore. His face was flushed, there was a jovial light in his eyes, the lips were parted in a swashbuckling smile, and when, with a genial hand, he sloshed me on the back before I could sidestep, it was as if I'd been kicked by a mule. "Well, Bertie," he proceeded, as blithely as a linnet, without a thing on his mind, "you'll be glad to hear that you were right. Your theory has been tested and proved correct. I feel like a fighting cock." My brain ceased to reel. I saw all. "Have you been having a drink?" "I have, as you advised. Unpleasant stuff, like medicine. Burns your throat, too, and makes one as thirsty as the dickens. How anyone can mop it up as you do for pleasure beats me. Still, I'd be the last to deny that it tunes up the system. I could bite a tiger." "What did you have?" "Whiskey. At least, that was the label on the decanter, and I've no reason to suppose that a woman like your aunt, staunch, true-blue British, would deliberately deceive the public. If she labels her decanters whiskey, then I consider that we know where we are. A whiskey and soda, eh? You couldn't have done better." "Soda?" said Gussie thoughtfully. "I knew there was something I'd forgotten. Didn't you put any soda in it?" "It never occurred to me. I just nipped into the dining room and drank out of the decanter." "How much?" "Oh, about 10 swallows, 12 maybe, or 14, say 16 medium-sized gulps. Gosh, I'm thirsty." He moved over to the wash-hand stand and drank deeply out of the water bottle. I cast a covert glance at Uncle Tom's photograph behind his back. For the first time since it had come into my life, I was glad that it was so large. It hid its secret well. If Gussie had caught sight of that jug of orange juice, he would unquestionably have been onto it like a knife. "Well, I'm glad you're feeling braced," I said. He moved buoyantly from the wash-hand stand and endeavoured to slush me on the back again. Foiled by my nimble footwork, he staggered to the bed and sat down upon it. "Braced? Did I say I could bite a tiger?" "You did." "Make it 2 tigers. I could chew holes in a steel door. What an ass you must have thought me out there in the garden. I see now you were laughing in your sleeve." "No, no, yes," insisted Gussie. "That very sleeve," he said, pointing. "And I don't blame you. I can't imagine why I made all that fuss about a potty job like distributing prizes at a rotten little country grammar school. Can you imagine, Bertie? No, exactly. Nor can I imagine. There's simply nothing to it. I just shin up on the platform, drop a few gracious words, hand the little blighters their prizes, and hop down again, admired by all. Not a suggestion of split trousers from start to finish. I mean, why should anybody split his trousers? I can't imagine. Can you imagine? No, nor can I imagine. I shall be a riot. I know just the sort of stuff that's needed. Simple, manly, optimistic stuff, straight from the shoulder. This shoulder, said Gussie, tapping. Why I was so nervous this morning I can't imagine. For anything simpler than distributing a few footling books to a bunch of grimy-faced kids, I can't imagine. Still, for some reason I can't imagine, I was feeling a little nervous, but now I feel fine. Bertie, fine. Fine, fine. And I say this to you as an old friend, because that's what you are, old man, when all the smoke was cleared away, an old friend. I don't think I've ever met an older friend. How long have you been an old friend of mine, Bertie? Oh, years and years. Imagine. But, of course, there must have been a time when you were a new friend. Hello, the luncheon gong. Come on, old friend. And rising from the bed like a performing flea, he made for the door. I followed rather pensively. What had occurred was, of course, so much velvet, as you might say. I mean, I'd wanted a braced thinknottle. Indeed, all my plans had a braced thinknottle as their end and aim. But I found myself wondering a little whether the thinknottle now sliding down the banister wasn't perhaps a shade too braced. His demeanour seemed to me that of a man who might quite easily throw bread about at lunch. Fortunately, however, the settled gloom of those round him exercised a restraining effect upon him at the table. It would have needed a far more plastered man to have been rollicking at such a gathering. I'd told the Bassett that there were aching hearts in Brinkley Court, and it now looked probable that there would shortly be aching tummies. Anatole, I learned, had retired to his bed with a fit of the vapours, and the meal now before us had been cooked by the kitchen maid, as C3 a performer as ever wielded a skillet. This, coming on top of their other troubles, induced in the company a pretty unanimous silence, a solemn stillness, as you might say, which even Gussie didn't seem prepared to break. Except, therefore, for one short snatch of song on his part, nothing untoward marked the occasion, and presently we rose, with instructions from Aunt Dahlia to put on festal raiment and be at Market Snodsbury not later than 3:30. This, leaving me ample time to smoke a gasper or two in a shady bower beside the lake, I did so, repairing to my room around about the hour of 3. Jeeves was on the job, adding the final polish to the old topper, and I was about to apprise him of the latest developments in the matter of Gussie, when he forestalled me by observing that the latter had only just concluded an agreeable visit to the Wooster bedchamber. "I found Mr. Thinknottle seated here when I arrived to lay out your clothes, sir." "Indeed, Jeeves. Gussie was in here, was he?" "Yes, sir. He left only a few moments ago. He's driving to the school with Mr. and Mrs. Travers in the large car." "Did you give him your story of the 2 Irishmen?" "Yes, sir. He laughed heartily." "Good. Have you any other contributions for him?" "I ventured to suggest that he might mention to the young gentleman that education is a drawing out, not a putting in. The late Lord Brancaster was much addicted to presenting prizes at schools, and he invariably employed this dictum." "And how did he react to that?" "He laughed heartily, sir." "This surprised you, no doubt, this practically incessant merriment, I mean?" "Yes, sir." "You thought it odd in one who, when you last saw him, was well up in Group A of the defeatists?" "Yes, sir." "There is a ready explanation, Jeeves. Since you last saw him, Gussie has been on a bender. He's as tight as an owl." "Indeed, sir." "Absolutely. His nerve cracked under the strain, and he sneaked into the dining room and started mopping the stuff up like a vacuum cleaner. Whiskey would seem to be what he filled the radiator with. I gather that he used up most of the decanter. Golly, Jeeves, it's lucky he didn't get that laced orange juice on top of that, what?" "Extremely, sir." I eyed the jug. Uncle Tom's photograph had fallen into the fender, and it was standing there right out in the open, where Gussie couldn't have helped seeing it. Mercifully, it was empty now. "It was a most prudent act on your part, if I may say so, sir, to dispose of the orange juice." I stared at the man. "What? Didn't you?" "No, sir." "Jeeves, let's get this clear. Was it not you who threw away that O.J.? "No, sir. I assumed when I entered the room and found the pitcher empty that you had done so." We looked at each other, awed, Two minds with but a single thought. I very much fear, sir. So do I, Jeeves. It would seem almost certain, quite certain. Weigh the facts, sift the evidence. The jug was standing on the mantelpiece for all eyes to behold. Gussie had been complaining of thirst. You found him in here, laughing heartily. I think that there can be little doubt, Jeeves, that the entire contents of that jug are at this moment reposing on top of the existing cargo in that already brilliantly lit man's interior. Disturbing, Jeeves. Most disturbing, sir. Let's face the position, forcing ourselves to be calm. You inserted in that jug, shall we say, a tumblerful of the right stuff? Fully a tumblerful, sir. And I added of my plenty about the same amount? Yes, sir. And in 2 shakes of a duck's tail, Gussie, with all that lapping about inside him, will be distributing the prizes at Market Snodsbury Grammar School before an audience of all that is fairest and most refined in the country. Yes, sir. It seems to me, Jeeves, that the ceremony may be one fraught with considerable interest. Yes, sir. What, in your opinion, will the harvest be? One finds it difficult to hazard a conjecture, sir. You mean imagination boggles? Yes, sir. I inspected my imagination. He was right. It boggled. Chapter 17. And yet, Jeeves, I said, twiddling a thoughtful steering wheel, there is always the bright side. Some 20 minutes had elapsed, and having picked the honest fellow up outside the front door, I was driving in the 2-seater to the picturesque town of Market Snodsbury. Since we'd parted, he to go to his lair and fetch his hat, I to remain in my room and complete the formal costume, I'd been doing some close thinking. The results of this I now proceeded to hand on to him. However dark the prospect may be, Jeeves, however murkily the storm clouds may seem to gather, a keen eye can usually discern the bluebird. It's bad, no doubt, that Gussie should be going, some 10 minutes from now, to distribute prizes in a state of advanced intoxication, but we must never forget that these things cut both ways. You imply, sir? Precisely. I'm thinking of him in his capacity of wooer. All this ought to have put him in a rare shape for offering his hand in marriage. I shall be vastly surprised if it won't turn him into a sort of caveman. Have you ever seen James Cagney in the movies? Yes, sir. Something on those lines. I heard him cough, and sniped him with a sideways glance. He was wearing that informative look of his. Then you haven't heard, sir? You're not aware that a marriage has been arranged and will shortly take place between Mr. Finknottle and Miss Bassett? What? Yes, sir. When did this happen? Shortly after Mr. Finknottle had left your room, sir. Ah, in the post-orange juice era? Yes, sir. But are you sure of your facts? How do you know? My informant was Mr. Finknottle himself, sir. He appeared anxious to confide in me. His story was somewhat incoherent, but I had no difficulty in apprehending its substance. Prefacing his remarks with the statement that this was a beautiful world, he laughed heartily and said that he had become formally engaged. No details? No, sir. But one can picture the scene. Yes, sir. I mean, imagination doesn't boggle. No, sir. And it didn't. I could see exactly what must have happened. Insert a liberal dose of mixed spirits in a normally abstemious man, and he becomes a force. He doesn't stand around twiddling his fingers and stammering. He acts. I had no doubt that Gussie must have reached for the Bassett and clasped her to him like a stevedore handling a sack of coals, and one could readily envisage the effect of that sort of thing on a girl of romantic mind. Well, 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 Jeeves. Yes, sir. This is splendid news. Yes, sir. You see how right I was now? Yes, sir. It must have been rather an eye-opener for you, watching me handle this case? Yes, sir. The simple, direct method never fails? No, sir. Whereas the elaborate does? Yes, sir. Right-o, Jeeves. We'd arrived at the main entrance of Market Snodsbury Grammar School. I parked the car and went in, well content. True, the Tuppy Angela problem still remained unsolved, and Aunt Dahlia's 500 quid seemed as far off as ever, but it was gratifying to feel that good old Gussie's troubles were over at any rate. The grammar school at Market Snodsbury had, I understood, been built somewhere in the year 1416, and as with so many of these ancient foundations, there still seemed to brood over its great hall, where the afternoon's festivities were to take place, not a little of the fug of the centuries. It was the hottest day of the summer, and though somebody had opened a tentative window or two, the atmosphere remained distinctive and individual. In this hall, the youth of Market Snodsbury had been eating its daily lunch for a matter of 500 years, and the flavour lingered. The air was sort of heavy and languorous, if you know what I mean, with the scent of young England and boiled beef and carrots. Aunt Dahlia, who was sitting with a bevy of the local nibs in the second row, sighted me as I entered and waved for me to join her, but I was too smart for that. I wedged myself in among the standees at the back, leaning up against a chap who, from the aroma, might have been a corn chandler or something of that order. The essence of strategy on these occasions is to be as near the door as possible. The hall was gaily decorated with flags and coloured paper, and the eye was further refreshed by the spectacle of a mixed drove of boys, parents, and what not, the former running a good deal to shiny faces and Eton collars, the latter stressing the black satin note, rather, when female, and looking as if their coats were too tight if male. And presently there was some applause. Sporadic, Jeeves has since told me it was, and I saw Gussie being steered by a bearded bloke in a gown to a seat in the middle of the platform. And I confess that as I beheld him, and felt that there, but for the grace of God, went Bertie Wooster, a shudder ran through the frame. It all reminded me so vividly of the time I'd addressed that girls' school. Of course, looking at it dispassionately, you may say that for horror and peril there is no comparison between an almost human audience, like the one before me, and a mob of small girls with pigtails down their backs, and this, I concede, is true. Nevertheless, the spectacle was enough to make me feel like a fellow watching a pal going over the Niagara Falls in a barrel, and the sort of what I'd escaped caused everything for a moment to go black and swim before my eyes. When I was able to see clearly once more, I perceived that Gussie was now seated. He had his hands on his knees, with his elbows out at right angles, like a nigger minstrel of the old school, about to ask Mr. Bones why a chicken crosses the road, and he was staring before him with a smile so fixed and pebble-beached that I should have thought that anybody could have guessed that there sat one in whom the old familiar juice was splashing up against the back of the front teeth. In fact, I saw Aunt Dahlia, who, having assisted at so many hunting dinners in her time, is second to none as a judge of the symptoms, give a start and gaze long and earnestly, and she was just saying something to Uncle Tom on her left, when the bearded bloke stepped to the footlights and started making a speech. From the fact that he spoke as if he had a hot potato in his mouth, without getting the raspberry from the lads in the ringside seats, I deduced that he must be the headmaster. With his arrival in the spotlight, a sort of perspiring resignation seemed to settle on the audience. Personally, I snuggled up against the chandler and let my attention wander. The speech was on the subject of the doings of the school during the past term, and this part of a prize-giving is always apt rather to fail to grip the visiting stranger. I mean, you know how it is. You're told that J.B. Brewster has won an exhibition for classics at Chaps, Cambridge, and you feel that it's one of those stories where you can't see how funny it is unless you really know the fellow. And the same applies to G. Bullitt being awarded the Lady Jane Wickes Scholarship at the Birmingham College of Veterinary Science. In fact, I and the corn chandler, who was looking a bit fagged, I thought as if he'd had a hard morning chandling the corn, were beginning to doze lightly when things suddenly brisked up, bringing Gussie into the picture for the first time. "Today," said the bearded bloke, "we are all happy to welcome as the guest of the afternoon, Mr. Fitzwattle." At the beginning of the address, Gussie had subsided into a sort of daydream, with his mouth hanging open. About halfway through, faint signs of life had begun to show, and for the last few minutes he'd been trying to cross one leg over the other, and failing, and having another shot, and failing again. But only now did he exhibit any real animation. He sat up with a jerk. "Finknottle," he said, opening his eyes. "Fitznottle," Finknottle. I should say Finknottle." "Of course you should, you silly ass," said Gussie genially. "All right, get on with it." And closing his eyes, he began trying to cross his legs again. I could see that this little spot of friction had rattled the bearded bloke a bit. He stood for a moment, fumbling at the fungus with a hesitating hand. But they make these headmasters of tough stuff. The weakness passed. He came back nicely and carried on. "We're all happy, I say, to welcome as the guest of the afternoon Mr. Finknottle, who has kindly consented to award the prizes. This task, as you know, is one that should have devolved upon that well-beloved and vigorous member of our Board of Governors, the Reverend William Plummer, and we are all, I am sure, very sorry that illness at the last moment should have prevented him from being here today. But if I may borrow a familiar metaphor if I may employ a homely metaphor familiar to you all, what we lose on the swings, we gain on the roundabouts." He paused, and beamed rather freely to show that this was comedy. I could have told the man it was no use. Not a ripple. The corn chandler leaned against me and muttered, "What did he say?" But that was all. It's always a nasty jar to wait for the laugh and find that the gag hasn't come across. The bearded bloke was visibly discomposed. At that, however, I think he would have got by had he not, at this juncture, unfortunately stirred Gussie up again. "In other words, though deprived of Mr. Plummer, we have with us this afternoon Mr. Finknottle. I am sure that Mr. Finknottle's name is one that needs no introduction to you. It is, I venture to assert, a name that is familiar to us all." "Not to you," said Gussie. And the next moment I saw what Jeeves had meant when he described him as laughing heartily. Heartily was absolutely the mot juste. It sounded like a gas explosion. "You didn't seem to know it so dashed well, what?" said Gussie. And reminded apparently by the word what of the word wattle, he repeated the latter some 16 times with a rising inflection. "Wattle, wattle, wattle," he concluded. "Right-ho, push on." But the bearded bloke had shot his bolt. He stood there, licked at last, and watching him closely, I could see that he was now at the crossroads. I could spot what he was thinking as clearly as if he'd confided it to my personal ear. He wanted to sit down and call it a day, I mean, but the thought that gave him pause was that if he did, he must then either uncork Gussie or take the Finknottle speech as read and get straight on to the actual prize-giving. It was a dashed tricky thing, of course, to have to decide on the spur of the moment. I was reading in the paper the other day about those birds who are trying to split the atom, the nub being that they haven't the foggiest as to what will happen if they do. It may be all right. On the other hand, it may not be all right. And pretty silly a chap would feel, no doubt, if, having split the atom, he suddenly found the house going up in smoke and himself torn limb from limb. So with the bearded bloke. Whether he was abreast of the inside facts in Gussie's case, I don't know, but it was obvious to him by this time that he'd run into something pretty hot. Trial gallops had shown that Gussie had his own way of doing things. Those interruptions had been enough to prove to the perspicacious that here, seated on the platform at the big binge of the season, was one who, if pushed forward to make a speech, might let himself go in a rather epoch-making manner. On the other hand, chain him up and put a green baize cloth over him, and where were you? The proceeding would be over about half an hour too soon. It was, as I say, a difficult problem to have to solve, and left to himself, I don't know what conclusion he would have come to. Personally, I think he would have played it safe. As it happened, however, the thing was taken out of his hands, for at this moment, Gussie, having stretched his arms and yawned a bit, switched on that pebble-beached smile again, and tacked down to the edge of the platform. "Speech," he said, affably. He then stood with his thumbs in the armholes of his waistcoat, waiting for the applause to die down. It was some time before this happened, for he'd got a very fine hand indeed. I suppose it wasn't often that the boys of Market Snodsbury Grammar School came across a man public-spirited enough to call their headmaster a silly ass. and they showed their application in no uncertain manner. Gussie may have been 1 over the 8, but as far as the majority of those present were concerned, he was sitting on top of the world. "Boys," said Gussie, "I mean, ladies and gentlemen and boys, I will not detain you long, but I propose on this occasion to feel compelled to say a few auspicious words. Ladies, boys, and gentlemen, we have all listened with interest to the remarks of our friend here who forgot to shave this morning. I don't know his name, but then he didn't know mine. Fitzwater, I mean, absolutely absurd, which squares things up a bit, and we are all sorry that the Reverend whatever he was called should be dying of adenoids. But, after all, here today, gone tomorrow, and all flesh is as grass and whatnot, but that wasn't what I wanted to say. What I wanted to say was this, and I say it confidently, without fear of contradiction. I say, in short, I am happy to be here on this auspicious occasion. I take much pleasure in kindly awarding the prizes consisting of the handsome books you see laid out on that table. As Shakespeare says, there are sermons in books, stones in the running brooks, or rather, the other way about, and there you have it in a nutshell. It went well, and I wasn't surprised. I couldn't quite follow some of it, but anybody could see that it was real ripe stuff. And I was amazed that even the course of treatment he'd been taking could have rendered so normally tongue-tied a dumb brick as Gussie capable of it. It just shows, what any member of Parliament will tell you, that if you want real oratory, the preliminary noggin is essential. Unless pie-eyed, you can't hope to grip. "Gentlemen," said Gussie, "I mean ladies and gentlemen, and of course boys, what a beautiful world this is. A beautiful world full of happiness on every side. Let me tell you a little story. 2 Irishmen, Pat and Mike, were walking along Broadway, and one said to the other, 'Begorra, the race is not always to the swift.' And the other replied, 'Faith and begob, education is a drawing out, not a putting in.' I must say it seemed to me the rottenest story I'd ever heard, and I was surprised that Jeeves should have considered it worth shoving into a speech. However, when I taxed him with this later, he said that Gussie had altered the plot a good deal, and I dare say that accounts for it. At any rate, that was the conte, as Gussie told it, and when I say that it got a very fair laugh, you'll understand what a popular favourite he'd become with the multitude. There might be a bearded bloke or so on the platform, and a small section in the second row, who were wishing the speaker would conclude his remarks and resume his seat, but the audience as a whole was for him solidly. There was applause, and a voice cried, 'Hear, hear!' 'Yes,' said Gussie, 'it is a beautiful world. The sky is blue, the birds are singing, there is optimism everywhere. And why not, boys and ladies and gentlemen? I'm happy, you're happy, we're all happy. Even the meanest Irishman that walks along Broadway. Though, as I say, there were 2 of them, Pat and Mike, one drawing out, the other putting in. I should like you boys, taking the time from me, to give 3 cheers for this beautiful world. All together now." Presently the dust settled down, and the plaster stopped falling from the ceiling, and he went on. "People who say it isn't a beautiful world don't know what they're talking about. Driving here in the car today to award the kind prizes, I was reluctantly compelled to take off my host on this very point, old Tom Travers. You'll see him sitting there in the second row next to the large lady in beige." He pointed helpfully, and the 100 or so market Snodsburyans who craned their necks in the direction indicated were able to observe Uncle Tom blushing prettily. "I ticked him off properly, the poor fish. He expressed the opinion that the world was in a deplorable state. I said, 'Don't talk rot, old Tom Travers.' 'I'm not accustomed to talk rot,' he said. 'Then for a beginner,' I said, 'you do it dashed well.' And I think you'll admit, boys and ladies and gentlemen, that was telling him." The audience seemed to agree with him. The point went big. The voice that had said, "Hear, hear," said, "Hear, hear" again, and Mike Cornchandler hammered the floor vigorously with a large-sized walking stick. "Well, boys," resumed Gussie, having shot his cuffs and smirked horribly, "this is the end of the summer term, and many of you, no doubt, are leaving the school. And I don't blame you, because there's a frowst in here you could cut with a knife. You're going to go out into the great world. Soon many of you will be walking along Broadway, and what I want to impress upon you is that however much you may suffer from adenoids, you must all use every effort to prevent yourselves becoming pessimists and talking rot like old Tom Travers. There, in the second row, the fellow with a face rather like a walnut. He paused to allow those wishing to do so to refresh themselves with another look at Uncle Tom, and I found myself musing in some little perplexity. Long association with the members of the drones has put me pretty well in touch with the various ways in which an overdose of the blushful hypocrine can take the individual, but I'd never seen anyone react quite as Gussie was doing. There was a sort of snap about his work which I'd never witnessed before, even in balmy Fotheringay Phipps on New Year's Eve. Jeeves, when I discussed the matter with him later, said it was something to do with inhibitions, if I caught the word correctly, and the suppression of, I think he said, the ego? What he meant, I gathered, was that, owing to the fact that Gussie had just completed a 5-year stretch of blameless seclusion among the newts, all the goofiness which ought to have spread out thin over those 5 years, and had been bottled up during that period, came to the surface on this occasion in a lump. Or, if you prefer to put it that way, like a tidal wave. There may be something in this. Jeeves generally knows. Anyway, be that as it may, I was dashed glad I had had the shrewdness to keep out of that second row. It might be unworthy of the prestige of a Wooster to squash in among the proletariat in the standing room only section, but at least I felt I was out of the danger zone. So thoroughly had Gussie got it up his nose by now, that it seemed to me that, had he cited me, he might have become personal about even an old school friend. "If there's one thing in the world I can't stand," proceeded Gussie, "it's a pessimist. Be optimists, boys. You all know the difference between an optimist and a pessimist. An optimist is a man, well, take the case of two Irishmen walking along Broadway. One is an optimist and one is a pessimist, just as one's name is Pat and the other's Mike. "Well, hello, Bertie, I didn't know you were here." Too late, I endeavoured to go to earth behind the chandler, only to discover that there was no chandler there. Some appointment, suddenly remembered, possibly a promise to his wife that he'd be home to tea, had caused him to ooze away while my attention was elsewhere, leaving me right out in the open. Between me and Gussie, who was now pointing in an offensive manner, there was nothing but a sea of interested faces looking up at me. "Now there," boomed Gussie, continuing to point, "is an instance of what I mean. Boys, and ladies and gentlemen, take a good look at that object standing up there at the back. Morning coat, trousers ass-worn, quiet grey tie, and carnation and buttonhole. You can't miss him. Bertie Wooster, that is, and as foul a pessimist as ever bit a tiger. I tell you, I despise that man. And why do I despise him? Because, boys and ladies and gentlemen, he is a pessimist. His attitude is defeatist. When I told him I was going to address you this afternoon, he tried to dissuade me. And you know why he tried to dissuade me? Because he said my trousers would split up the back." The cheers that greeted this were the loudest yet. Anything about splitting trousers went straight to the simple hearts of the young scholars of Market Snodsbury Grammar School. Two in the row in front of me turned purple, and a small lad with freckles seated beside them asked me for my autograph. Let me tell you a story about Bertie Wooster. A Wooster can stand a good deal, but he can't stand having his name bandied in a public place. Picking my feet up softly, I was in the very process of executing a quiet sneak for the door, when I perceived that the bearded bloke had at last decided to apply the closure. Why he hadn't done so before is beyond me. Spellbound, I take it. And, of course, when a chap is going like a breeze with the public, as Gussie had been, it's not so dashed easy to chip in. However, the prospect of hearing another of Gussie's anecdotes seemed to have done the trick. Rising rather as I'd risen from my bench at the beginning of that painful scene with Tuppy in the twilight, he made a leap for the table, snatched up a book, and came bearing down on the speaker. He touched Gussie on the arm, and Gussie, turning sharply and seeing a large bloke with a beard apparently about to bean him with a book, sprang back in an attitude of self-defence. "Perhaps as time is getting on, Mr. Finknottle, we'd better—" "Oh, said Gussie, getting the trend. He relaxed. "The prizes, eh? Of course, yes. Right-o, yes. We might as well be shoving along with it. What's this one?" "Spelling and dictation, P.K. Purvis," announced the bearded bloke. "Spelling and dictation, P.K. Purvis," echoed Gussie, as if he were calling coals. "Forward, P.K. Purvis." Now that the whistle had been blown on his speech, it seemed to me that there was no longer any need for the strategic retreat which I'd been planning. I'd no wish to tear myself away unless I had to. I mean, I told Jeeves that this binge would be fraught with interest, and it was fraught with interest. There was a fascination about Gussie's methods which gripped and made one reluctant to pass the thing up, provided personal innuendos were steered clear of. I decided accordingly to remain, and presently there was a musical squeaking, and P.K. Purvis climbed the platform. The spelling and dictation chap was about 3'6" in his squeaking shoes, with a pink face and sandy hair. Gussie patted this hair. He seemed to have taken an immediate fancy to the lad. "You P.K. Purvis?" "Sir, yes, sir." "It's a beautiful world, P.K. Purvis?" "Sir, yes, sir." "Ah, you noticed it, have you? Good. You married by any chance?" "Sir, no, sir." "Get married, P.K. Purvis," said Gussie earnestly. "It's the only life. Well, here's your book. Looks rather bilge to me from a glance at the title page, but such as it is, here you are." P.K. Purvis squeaked off amidst sporadic applause, but one couldn't fail to note that the sporadic was followed by a rather strained silence. It was evident that Gussie was striking something of a new note in Market Snodsbury scholastic circles. Looks were exchanged between parent and parent. The bearded bloke had the air of one who drained the bitter cup. As for Aunt Dahlia, her demeanour now told only too clearly that her last doubts had been resolved, and her verdict was in. I saw her whisper to the Basset, who sat on her right, and the Basset nodded sadly and looked like a fairy about to shed a tear and add another star to the Milky Way. Gussie, after the departure of P.K. Purvis, had fallen into a sort of daydream, and was standing with his mouth open and his hands in his pockets. Becoming abruptly aware that a fat kid in knickerbockers was at his elbow, he started violently. "Hello," he said, visibly shaken. "Who are you?" "This," said the bearded bloke, "is R.V. Smethurst." "What's he doing here?" asked Gussie suspiciously. "You are presenting him with the drawing prize, Mr. Finknottle." This apparently struck Gussie as a reasonable explanation. His face cleared. "That's right, too," he said. "Well, here it is, Cocky. You off?" he said, as the kid prepared to withdraw. "Sir, yes, sir." "Wait, R.V. Smethurst, not so fast. Before you go, there's a question I wish to ask you." But the bearded bloke's aim now seemed to be to rush the ceremonies a bit. He hustled R.V. Smethurst off stage rather like a chucker-out in a pub regretfully ejecting an old and respected customer, and started paging G.G. Simmons. A moment later the latter was up and coming, and conceive my emotion when it was announced that the subject on which he'd clicked was scripture knowledge. One of us, I mean to say. G.G. Simmons was an unpleasant, perky-looking stripling, mostly front teeth and spectacles, but I gave him a big hand. We scripture knowledge sharks stick together. Gussie, I was sorry to see, didn't like him. There was in his manner, as he regarded G.G. Simmons, none of the chumminess which had marked it during his interview with P.K. Purvis, or, in a somewhat lesser degree, with R.V. Smethurst. He was cold and distant. "Well, G.G. Simmons?" "Sir, yes, sir." "What do you mean, sir, yes, sir? Dashed silly thing to say. So you've won the Scripture Knowledge Prize, have you?" "Sir, yes, sir." "Yes," said Gussie. "You look just the sort of little tick who would. And yet," he said, pausing and eyeing the child keenly, "how are we to know that this has all been open and above-board? Let me test you, G.G. Simmons. Who was, what's-his-name, the chap who begat Thingamy? Can you answer me that, Simmons?" "Sir, no, sir." Gussie turned to the bearded bloke. "Fishy," he said, "very fishy. This boy appears to be totally lacking in scripture knowledge." The bearded bloke passed a hand across his forehead. "I can assure you, Mr. Finknottle, that every care was taken to ensure a correct marking, and that Simmons outdistanced his competitors by a wide margin." "Well, if you say so," said Gussie doubtfully. "All right, G.G. Simmons, take your prize." "Sir, thank you, sir." "But let me tell you that there's nothing to stick on side about in winning a prize for scripture knowledge. Bertie Wooster, I don't know when I've had a nastier shock. I'd been going on the assumption that now that they'd stopped him making his speech, Gussie's fangs had been drawn, as you might say. To duck my head down and resume my edging towards the door was, with me, the work of a moment. Bertie Wooster won the Scripture Knowledge Prize at a kids' school we were at together, and you know what he's like. But, of course, Bertie frankly cheated. He succeeded in scrounging that Scripture Knowledge trophy over the heads of better men by means of some of the rawest and most brazen swindling methods ever witnessed, even at a school where such things were common. If that man's pockets, as he entered the examination room, were not stuffed to bursting point with lists of kings of Judah—" I heard no more. A moment later I was out in God's air, fumbling with a fevered foot at the self-starter of the old car. The engine raced, the clutch slid into position. I tooted and drove off. My ganglions were still vibrating as I ran the car into the stables of Brinkley Court, and it was a much shaken Bertram who tottered up to his room to change into something loose. Having donned flannels, I lay down on the bed for a bit, and I suppose I must have dozed off, and the next thing I remember is finding Jeeves at my side. I sat up. "My tea, Jeeves?" "No, sir. It's nearly dinner time." The mists cleared away. "I must have been asleep." "Yes, sir." "Nature taking its toll of the exhausted frame." "Yes, sir." "And enough to make it." "Yes, sir." "And now it's nearly dinner time, you say?" "All right. I'm in no mood for dinner, but I suppose you'd better lay out the clothes." "It will not be necessary, sir. The company will not be dressing tonight. A cold collation has been set out in the dining-room." "Why's that?" "It was Mrs. Travers's wish that this should be done in order to minimize the work for the staff, who are attending a dance at Sir Percival Stretchley Budd's residence tonight." "Of course, yes, I remember. My cousin Angela told me. Tonight's the night, what? You going, Jeeves?" "No, sir. I'm not very fond of this form of entertainment in the rural district, sir." "I know what you mean. These country binges are all the same. A piano, one fiddle, and a floor like sandpaper. Is Anatole going?" "Angela hinted not." Miss Angela was correct, sir. Monsieur Anatole is in bed." "Temperamental blighters, these Frenchmen?" "Yes, sir." There was a pause. "Well, Jeeves," I said, "it was certainly one of those afternoons, what?" "Yes, sir." "I can't recall one more packed with incident. And I left before the finish." "Yes, sir. I observed your departure." "You couldn't blame me for withdrawing." "No, sir. Mr. Finknottle had undoubtedly become embarrassingly personal." "Was there much more of it after I went?" "No, sir. The proceedings terminated very shortly. Mr. Finknottle's remarks with reference to Master G.G. Simmons brought about an early closure." "But he'd finished his remarks about G.G. Simmons." "Only temporarily, sir. He resumed them immediately after your departure. If you recollect, sir, he had already proclaimed himself suspicious of Master Simmons's bona fides, and he now proceeded to deliver a violent verbal attack upon the young gentleman, asserting that it was impossible for him to have won the Scripture Knowledge Prize without systematic cheating on an impressive scale. He went so far as to suggest that Master Simmons was well known to the police." "Golly, Jeeves." "Yes, sir. The words did create a considerable sensation. The reaction of those present to this accusation I should describe as mixed. The young students appeared pleased and applauded vigorously, but Master Simmons's mother rose from her seat and addressed Mr. Finknottle in terms of strong protest." "Did Gussie seem taken aback? Did he recede from his position?" "No, sir. He said that he could see it all now, and hinted at a guilty liaison between Master Simmons's mother and the headmaster, accusing the latter of having cooked the marks, as his expression was, in order to gain favour with the former. You don't mean that— Yes, sir. Egad, Jeeves. And then they sang the national anthem, sir. Surely not. Yes, sir. At a moment like that? Yes, sir. Well, you were there, and you know, of course, but I should have thought the last thing Gussie and this woman would have done in the circus would have been to start singing duets. You misunderstand me, sir. It was the entire company who sang. The headmaster turned to the organist and said something to him in a low tone, upon which the latter began to play the national anthem, and the proceedings terminated. Oh, I see. About time, too. Yes, sir. Mrs. Simmons's attitude had become unquestionably menacing. I pondered. What I had heard was, of course, of a nature to excite pity and terror, not to mention alarm and despondency, and it would be paltering with the truth to say that I was pleased about it. On the other hand, it was all over now, and it seemed to me that the thing to do wasn't to mourn over the past, but to fix the mind on the bright future. I mean to say, Gussie might have lowered the existing Worcestershire record for goofiness, and definitely forfeited all chance of becoming Market Snodsbury's favourite son, but you couldn't get away from the fact that he had proposed to Madeline Bassett, and you had to admit that she had accepted him. I put this to Jeeves. A frightful exhibition, I said, and one which will very possibly ring down history's pages, but we mustn't forget, Jeeves, that Gussie, though now doubtless looked upon in the neighbourhood as the world's worst freak, is all right otherwise. No, sir. I didn't quite get this. When you say, no, sir, do you mean yes, sir? No, sir, I mean no, sir. He's not all right otherwise? No, sir. But he's betrothed? No longer, sir. Miss Bassett has severed the engagement. You don't mean that? Yes, sir. I wondered if you've noticed a rather peculiar thing about this chronicle. I allude to the fact that at one time or another practically everybody playing a part in it has had occasion to bury his or her face in his or her hands. I have participated in some pretty glutinous affairs in my time, but I think that never before or since have I been mixed up with such a solid body of brow clutchers. Uncle Tom did it, if you remember, so did Gussie, so did Tuppy, so probably, though I have no data, did Anatole, and I wouldn't put it past the Bassett. And Aunt Dahlia, I've no doubt, would have done it too, but for the risk of disarranging the carefully fixed coiffure. Well, what I'm trying to say is that at this juncture I did it myself. Up went the hands, and down went the head, and in another jiffy I was clutching as energetically as the best of them. And it was while I was still massaging the coconut and wondering what the next move was that something barged up against the door like the delivery of a ton of coals. "I think this may very possibly be Mr. Finknottle himself, sir," said Jeeves. His intuition, however, had led him astray. It wasn't Gussie, but Tuppy. He came in and stood breathing asthmatically. It was plain that he was deeply stirred. Chapter 18. I eyed him narrowly. I didn't like his looks. Mark you, I don't say I ever had much, because nature, when planning this sterling fellow, shoved in a lot more lower jaw than was absolutely necessary, and made the eyes a bit too keen and piercing for one who was neither an empire builder nor a traffic policeman. But on the present occasion, in addition to offending the aesthetic sense, this glossop seemed to me to be wearing a distinct air of menace, and I found myself wishing that Jeeves wasn't always so dashed tactful. I mean, it's all very well to remove yourself like an eel sliding into mud when the employer has a visitor, but there are moments, and it looked to me as if this was going to be one of them, when the truer tact is to stick round and stand ready to lend a hand in the free-for-all. For Jeeves was no longer with us. I hadn't seen him go, and I hadn't heard him go, but he had gone. As far as the eye could reach, one noted nobody but Tuppy. And in Tuppy's demeanour, as I say, there was a certain something that tended to disquiet. He looked to me very much like a man who'd come to reopen that matter of my tickling Angela's ankles. However, his opening remark told me that I'd been alarming myself unduly. It was of a pacific nature, and came as a great relief. "Bertie," he said, "I owe you an apology. I've come to make it." My relief on hearing these words, containing as they did no reference of any sort to tickled ankles, was, as I say, great. But I don't think it was any greater than my surprise. Months had passed since that painful episode at the drones, and until now he hadn't given a sign of remorse and contrition. Indeed, word had reached me through private sources that he frequently told the story at dinners and other gatherings, and when doing so laughed his silly head off. I found it hard to understand, accordingly, what could have caused him to abase himself at this later date. Presumably he'd been given the elbow by his better self. But why? Still, there he was. "My dear chap," I said, gentlemanly to the gills, "don't mention it." "What's the sense of saying don't mention it? I have mentioned it. I mean, don't mention it any more. Don't give the matter another thought. We all of us forget ourselves sometimes and do things which in our calmer moments we regret. No doubt you were a bit tight at the time? What the devil do you think you're talking about?" I didn't like his tone. Brusque. "Correct me if I'm wrong," I said, with a certain stiffness, "but I assumed that you were apologizing for your foul conduct in looping back the last ring that night in the drones, causing me to plunge into the swimming bee in the full soup and fish." "Ass! Not that at all." "Then what?" "This Bassett business." "What Bassett business?" "Bertie," said Tuppy, "when you told me last night that you were in love with Madeline Bassett, I gave you the impression that I believed you, but I didn't. The thing seemed too incredible. However, since then I've made inquiries, and the fact appears to square with your statement. I've now come to apologize for doubting you." "Made inquiries?" "I asked her if you had proposed to her, and she said yes, you had." "Tuppy, you didn't." "I did." "Have you no delicacy, no proper feeling?" "No." "Oh, well, righto, of course, but I think you ought to have." "Delicacy be dashed. I wanted to be certain that it wasn't you who stole Angela from me. I now know it wasn't." So long as he knew that, I didn't so much mind him having no delicacy. "Ah," I said, "well, that's fine. Hold that thought. I have found out who it was." "What?" He stood brooding for a moment. His eyes were smouldering with a dull fire. His jaw stuck out like the back of Jeeves's head. "Bertie," he said, "do you remember what I swore I'd do to the chap who stole Angela from me?" "As nearly as I recall, you plan to pull him inside out." "And make him swallow himself." "Correct. The program still holds good." "But, Tuppy, I keep assuring you, as competent eyewitness, that nobody snitched Angela from you during that can trip." "No, but they did after she got back." "What?" "Don't keep saying what you heard." "But she hasn't seen anybody since she got back." "Oh, no? How about that Newt bloke?" "Gussie?" "Precisely, the serpent think-nottle." This seemed to me to be absolute gibbering. "But Gussie loves the Bassett." "You can't all love this blighted Bassett. What astonishes me is that anyone can do it. He loves Angela, I tell you, and she loves him." "But Angela handed you your hat before Gussie ever got here." "No, she didn't. Couple of hours after." "He couldn't have fallen in love with her in a couple of hours." "Why not? I fell in love with her in a couple of minutes. I worshipped her immediately we met, the pop-eyed little excrescence." "But dash it, don't argue, Bertie. The facts are all docketed. She loves this Newton-nuzzling blister." "Quite absurd, laddie. Quite absurd." "Oh?" He ground a heel into the carpet. "A thing I've often read about, but had never seen done before." "Then perhaps you'll explain how it is that she happens to come to be engaged to him." You could have knocked me down with an F. "Engaged to him?" "She told me herself." "She was kidding you." "She was not kidding me. Shortly after the conclusion of this afternoon's binge at Market Snodsbury Grammar School, he asked her to marry him, and she appears to have right-hoed without a murmur." "There must be some mistake." There was. The snake Finknottle made it, and by now I bet he realizes it. I've been chasing him since 5:30. Chasing him? All over the place. I want to pull his head off. I see, quite. You haven't seen him by any chance? No. Well, if you do, say goodbye to him quickly and put in your order for lilies. Oh, Jeeves. Sir? I hadn't heard the door open, but the man was on the spot once more. My private belief, as I think I've mentioned before, is that Jeeves doesn't have to open doors. He's like one of those birds in India who bung their astral bodies about. The chaps, I mean, who, having gone into thin air in Bombay, reassemble the parts and appear 2 minutes later in Calcutta. Only some such theory will account for the fact that he's not there one moment and is there the next. He just seems to float from spot A to spot B like some form of gas. Have you seen Mr. Finknottle, Jeeves? No, sir. I'm going to murder him. Very good, sir. Tuppy withdrew, banging the door behind him, and I put Jeeves abreast. Jeeves, I said, do you know what? Mr. Finknottle is engaged to my cousin Angela. Indeed, sir. Well, how about it? Do you grasp the psychology? Does it make sense? Only a few hours ago he was engaged to Miss Bassett. Gentlemen who have been discarded by one young lady are often apt to attach themselves without delay to another, sir. It is what is known as a gesture. I began to grasp. I see what you mean. Defiant stuff? Yes, sir. A sort of, oh, right-ho, please yourself, but if you don't want me, there are plenty who do. Precisely, sir. My cousin George— Never mind about your cousin George, Jeeves. Very good, sir. Keep him for the long winter evenings, what? Just as you wish, sir. And anyway, I bet your cousin George wasn't a shrinking, non-goose-booing jellyfish like Gussie. That's what astounds me, Jeeves, that it should be Gussie who's been putting in all this heavy gesture-making stuff. You must remember, sir, that Mr. Finknottle is in a somewhat inflamed cerebral condition. But that's true, a bit above par at the moment, as it were. Exactly, sir. Well, I'll tell you one thing, he'll be in a jolly sight more inflamed cerebral condition if Tuppy gets hold of him. What's the time? Just on 8 o'clock, sir. Then Tuppy has been chasing him for 2 hours and a half. We must save the unfortunate blighter, Jeeves? Yes, sir. A human life is a human life, what? Exceedingly true, sir. The first thing, then, is to find him. After that we can discuss plans and schemes. Go forth, Jeeves, and scour the neighbourhood. It will not be necessary, sir. If you will glance behind you, you will see Mr. Finknottle coming out from beneath your bed. And by Jove, he was absolutely right. There was Gussie emerging as stated. He was covered with fluff and looked like a tortoise popping forth for a bit of a breather. Gussie, I said. Jeeves, said Gussie. Sir, said Jeeves. Is that door locked, Jeeves? No, sir, but I will attend to the matter immediately. Gussie sat down on the bed, and I thought for a moment that he was going to be in the mode by burying his face in his hands. However, he merely brushed a dead spider from his brow. Have you locked the door, Jeeves? Yes, sir, because you can never tell that ghastly Glossop may not take it into his head to come— The word back froze on his lips. He hadn't got any further than an N-ish sound when the handle of the door began to twist and rattle. He sprang from the bed, and for an instant stood looking exactly like a picture my Aunt Agatha has in her dining room, The Stag at Bay, Landseer. Then he made a dive for the cupboard and was inside it before one really got onto it that he'd started leaping. I've seen fellows late for the 9:15 move less nippily. I shot a glance at Jeeves. He allowed his right eyebrow to flicker slightly, which is as near as he ever gets to a display of the emotions. "Hello," I yipped. "Let me in, blast you," responded Tuppy's voice from without. "Who locked this door?" I consulted Jeeves once more in the language of the eyebrow. He raised one of his, I raised one of mine. He raised his other, I raised my other. Then we both raised both. Finally, there seeming no other policy to pursue, I flung wide the gates, and Tuppy came shooting in. "Now what?" I said as nonchalantly as I could manage. "Why was the door locked?" demanded Tuppy. I was in pretty good eyebrow-raising form by now, so I gave him a touch of it. "Is one to have no privacy, Glossop?" I said coldly. "I instructed Jeeves to lock the door because I was about to disrobe." "A likely story," said Tuppy, and I'm not sure he didn't add, "forsooth. You needn't try to make me believe that you're afraid people are going to run excursion trains to see you in your underwear. You locked that door because you got the snake Finknottle in here. I suspected it the moment I'd left, and I decided to come back and investigate. I'm going to search this room from end to end. I believe he's in that cupboard. What's in this cupboard?" "Just clothes," I said, having another stab at the nonchalant, though extremely dubious as to whether it would come off. "The usual wardrobe of the English gentleman paying a country house visit." "You're lying." Well, I wouldn't have been if he'd only waited a minute before speaking, because the words were hardly out of his mouth before Gussie was out of the cupboard. I've commented on the speed with which he'd gone in. It was as nothing to the speed with which he emerged. There was a sort of whir and blur, and he was no longer with us. I think Tuppy was surprised. In fact, I'm sure he was. Despite the confidence with which he'd stated his view that the cupboard contained Finknottle, it plainly disconcerted him to have the chap fizzing out at him like this. He gargled sharply and jumped back about 5 feet. The next moment, however, he'd recovered his poise and was galloping down the corridor in pursuit. It only needed Aunt Dahlia after them, shouting yoiks or whatever is customary on these occasions, to complete the resemblance to a brisk run with the quorn. I sank into a handy chair. I'm not a man whom it's easy to discourage, but it seemed to me that things had at last begun to get too complex for Bertram. "Jeeves," I said, "all this is a bit thick." "Yes, sir." "The head rather swims." "Yes, sir." "I think you'd better leave me, Jeeves. I shall need to devote the very closest thought to the situation which has arisen." "Very good, sir." The door closed. I lit a cigarette and began to ponder. Chapter 19. Most chaps in my position, I imagine, would have pondered all the rest of the evening without getting a bite, but we Woosters have an uncanny knack of going straight to the heart of things, and I don't suppose it was much more than 10 minutes after I'd started pondering before I saw what had to be done. What was needed to straighten matters out, I perceived, was a heart-to-heart talk with Angela. She'd caused all the trouble by her mutton-headed behaviour and saying yes instead of no when Gussie, in the grip of mixed drinks and cerebral excitement, had suggested teaming up. She must obviously be properly ticked off and made to return him to store. A quarter of an hour later I tracked her down to the summer house in which she was taking a cooler and was seating myself by her side. "Angela," I said, and if my voice was stern, well, whose wouldn't have been? "This is all perfect drivel." She seemed to come out of a reverie. She looked at me inquiringly. "I'm sorry, Bertie, I didn't hear. What were you talking drivel about?" "I wasn't talking drivel." "Oh, sorry. I thought you said you were." "Is it likely that I'd come out here in order to talk drivel?" "Very likely." I thought it best to haul off and approach the matter from another angle. "I've just been seeing Tuppy." "Oh." "And Gussie Finknottle." "Oh, yes." "It appears that you've gone and got engaged to the latter." "Quite right." "Well, that's what I meant when I said it was all perfect drivel. You can't possibly love a chap like Gussie." "Why not?" "You simply can't." "Well, I mean to say, of course she couldn't. Nobody could love a freak like Gussie except a similar freak like the Bassett. The shot wasn't on the board. A splendid chap, of course, in many ways. Courteous, amiable, and just the fellow to tell you what to do till the doctor came if you had a sick newt on your hands, but quite obviously not of Mendelssohn's March timbre. I've no doubt that you could have flung bricks by the hour in England's most densely populated districts without endangering the safety of a single girl capable of becoming Mrs. Augustus Finknottle without an anaesthetic. I put this to her, and she was forced to admit the justice of it. "All right, then, perhaps I don't." "Then what," I said keenly, "did you want to go and get engaged to him for, you unreasonable young fathead?" "I thought it would be fun." "Fun? And so it has been. I've had a lot of fun out of it. You should have seen Tuppy's face when I told him. A sudden bright light shone upon me. Ha! A gesture! What? You got engaged to Gussie just to score off Tuppy. I did. Well, then, that was what I was saying. It was a gesture. Yes, I suppose you could call it that. And I'll tell you something else I'll call it, viz. A dashed low trick. I'm surprised at you, young Angela. I don't see why. I curled the lip about half an inch. Being a female, you wouldn't. You gentler sexes are like that. You pull off the rawest stuff without a pang. You pride yourselves on it. Look at Jael, the wife of Heber. Where did you ever hear of Jael, the wife of Heber? Possibly you're not aware that I once won a Scripture Knowledge Prize at school. Oh yes, I remember Augustus mentioning it in his speech. Quite, I said, a little hurriedly. I'd no wish to be reminded of Augustus's speech. Well, as I say, look at Jael, the wife of Heber. Dug spikes into the guest's coconut while he was asleep, and then went swanking about the place like a girl guide. No wonder they say, "Oh, woman, woman." Who? The chaps who do. What a sex. But you aren't proposing to keep this up, of course. Keep what up? This rotter being engaged to Gussie. I certainly am. Just to make Tuppy look silly? Do you think he looks silly? I do. So he ought to. I began to get the idea that I wasn't making real headway. I remember when I won that Scripture Knowledge Prize having to go into the facts about Balaam's ass. I can't quite recall what they were, but I still retain a sort of general impression of something digging its feet in and putting its ears back and refusing to cooperate. And it seemed to me that this was what Angela was doing now. She and Balaam's ass were, so to speak, sisters under the skin. There's a word beginning with R. Re-something, recal something. No, it's gone. But what I'm driving at is that is what Angela was showing herself. Silly young geezer, I said. She pinkened. I'm not a silly young geezer. You are a silly young geezer, and what's more, you know it. I don't know anything of the kind. Here you are, wrecking Tuppy's life, wrecking Gussie's life, all for the sake of a cheap score. Well, it's no business of yours. I sat on this promptly. No business of mine when I see two lives I used to go to school with wrecked. Ha! Besides, you know you're potty about Tuppy. I'm not. Is that so? If I had a quid for every time I've seen you gaze at him with the lovelight in your eyes— She gazed at me, but without the lovelight. Oh, for goodness sake, go away and boil your head, Bertie. I drew myself up. That, I replied with dignity, is just what I am going to go away and boil. At least, I shall now leave you. I have said my say. Good. But, permit me to add, I won't. Very good, I said coldly. In that case, tinkety-tonk. And I meant it to sting. Moody and discouraged were about the two adjectives you'd have selected to describe me as I left the summer-house. It would be idle to deny that I had expected better results from this little chat. I was surprised at Angela. Odd how you never realize that every girl is at heart a vicious specimen until something goes wrong with her love affair. This cousin and I had been meeting freely since the days when I wore sailor suits and she hadn't any front teeth. Yet only now was I beginning to get on to her hidden depths. A simple, jolly, kindly young pimple she'd always struck me as, the sort you could more or less rely on not to hurt a fly. But here she was now, laughing heartlessly. At least I seem to remember hearing her laugh heartlessly, like something cold and callous out of a sophisticated talkie, and fairly spitting on her hands in her determination to bring Tuppy's grey hairs in sorrow to the grave. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, girls are rummy. Old Pop Kipling never said a truer word than when he made that crack about the F of the S being more D than the M. It seemed to me in the Cirques that there was but one thing to do. That is, head for the dining room and take a slash at that cold collation of which Jeeves had spoken. I felt in urgent need of sustenance, for the recent interview had pulled me down a bit. There's no gainsaying the fact that all this naked emotion stuff reduces a chap's vitality and puts him in the vein for a good whack at the beef and ham. To the dining room, accordingly, I repaired, and had barely crossed the threshold when I perceived Aunt Dahlia at the sideboard tucking into salmon mayonnaise. The spectacle drew from me a quick, "Oh, ah," for I was somewhat embarrassed. The last time this relative and I had enjoyed a tete-a-tete, it'll be remembered, she'd sketched out plans for drowning me in the kitchen garden pond, and I wasn't quite sure what my present standing with her was. I was relieved to find her in genial mood. Nothing could have exceeded the cordiality with which she waved her fork. "Oh, Bertie, you old ass," was her very matey greeting. "I thought I shouldn't find you far away from the food. Try some of this salmon. Excellent." "Anatole's?" I queried. "No, he's still in bed, but the kitchen maid has struck an inspired streak. Suddenly seems to have come home to her that she isn't catering for a covey of buzzards in the Sahara Desert. She's put out something quite fit for human consumption. There is good in the girl, after all, and I hope she enjoys herself at the dance." I ladled out a portion of salmon, and we fell into pleasant conversation, chatting of this servants' ball at the Stretchley Buds, and speculating idly, I recall, as to what Seppings the butler would look like doing the rumba. It wasn't till I'd cleaned up the first platter, and was embarking on a second, that the subject of Gussie came up. Considering what had passed at Market Snodsbury that afternoon, it was one which I'd been expecting her to touch on earlier. When she did touch on it, I could see that she hadn't yet been informed of Angela's engagement. "I say, Bertie," she said, meditatively chewing fruit salad, "this spink bottle." "Nottle. Bottle," insisted the aunt firmly. "After that exhibition of his this afternoon, bottle and nothing but bottle is how I shall always think of him. However, what I was going to say was that if you see him, I wish you'd tell him that he's made an old woman very, very happy. Except for the time when the curate tripped over a loose shoelace and fell down the pulpit steps, I don't think I've ever had a more wonderful moment than when good old Bottle suddenly started ticking Tom off from the platform. In fact, I thought his whole performance in the most perfect taste." I could not but demur. Those references to myself, those were what I liked next best. I thought they were fine. Is it true that you cheated when you won that Scripture Knowledge Prize? Certainly not. My victory was the outcome of the most strenuous and unremitting efforts. How about this pessimism we hear of? Are you a pessimist, Bertie? I could have told her that what was occurring in this house was rapidly making me one, but I said no, I wasn't. "That's right, never be a pessimist. Everything is for the best in this best of all possible worlds. It's a long lane that has no turning. It's always darkest before the dawn. Have patience and all will come right. The sun will shine, although the day's a grey one. Try some of this salad." I followed her advice, but even as I applied the spoon, my thoughts were elsewhere. I was perplexed. It may have been the fact that I'd recently been hobnobbing with so many bowed-down hearts that made this cheeriness of hers seem so bizarre, but bizarre was certainly what I found it. "I thought you might have been a trifle peeved," I said. "Peeved? By Gussie's manoeuvres on the platform this afternoon? I confess that I'd rather expected the tapping foot and the drawn brow." "Nonsense! What was there to be peeved about? I took the whole thing as a great compliment, proud to feel that any drink from my cellars could have produced such a majestic jag. It restores one's faith in post-war whiskey. Besides, I couldn't be peeved at anything tonight. I'm like a little child clapping its hands and dancing in the sunshine. For though it has been some time getting a move on, Bertie, the sun has at last broken through the clouds. Ring out those joy bells. Anatole has withdrawn his notice." "What?" "Oh, very hearty congratulations." "Thanks. Yes, I worked on him like a beaver after I got back this afternoon, and finally, vowing he would ne'er consent, he consented. He stays on, praises be, and the way I look at it now is that God is in his heaven and all's right with—" She broke off. The door had opened, and we were plus a butler. "Hello, Seppings," said Aunt Dahlia. "I thought you'd gone." "Not yet, madam." "Well, I hope you'll all have a good time." "Thank you, madam." "Was there something you wanted to see me about?" "Yes, madam.
It is with reference to Monsieur Anatole. Is it by your wish, madam, that Mr. Finknottle is making faces at Monsieur Anatole through the skylight of his bedroom?
Chapter 20. There was one of those long silences. Pregnant, I believe, is what they're generally called. Aunt looked at Butler. Butler looked at Aunt. I looked at both of them. An eerie stillness seemed to envelop the room like a linseed poultice. I happened to be biting on a slice of apple in my fruit salad at the moment, and it sounded as if Carnera had jumped off the top of the Eiffel Tower onto a cucumber frame. Aunt Dahlia steadied herself against the sideboard and spoke in a low, husky voice.
Faces? Yes, madam. Through the skylight? Yes, madam. You mean he's sitting on the roof? Yes, madam. It has upset Monsieur Anatole very much.
I suppose it was that word upset that touched Aunt Dahlia off. Experience had taught her what happened when Anatole got upset. I'd always known her as a woman who was quite active on her pins, but I never suspected her of being capable of the magnificent burst of speed which she now showed. Pausing merely to get a rich hunting field expletive off her chest, she was out of the room and making for the stairs before I could swallow a sliver of, I think, banana. And feeling, as I'd felt when I got that telegram of hers about Angela and Tuppy, that my place was by her side, I put down my plate and hastened after her, Seppings following at a loping gallop. I saw that my place was by her side, but it wasn't so dashed easy to get there, for she was setting a cracking pace. At the top of the first flight she must have led a matter of half a dozen lengths, and was still shaking off my challenge when she rounded into the second. At the next landing, however, the gruelling going appeared to tell on her, for she slackened off a trifle and showed symptoms of roaring, and by the time we were in the straight we were running practically neck and neck. Our entry into Anatole's room was as close a finish as you could have wished to see. Result: first, Aunt Dahlia; second, Bertram; third, Seppings, one by a short head. Half a staircase separated second and third. The first thing that met the eye on entering was Anatole. This wizard of the cooking stove is a tubby little man with a moustache of the outsize or soup strainer type, and you can generally take a line through it as to the state of his emotions. When all is well, it turns up at the ends like a sergeant major's. When the soul is bruised, it droops. It was drooping now, striking a sinister note. And if any shadow of doubt had remained as to how he was feeling, the way he was carrying on would have dispelled it. He was standing by the bed in pink pyjamas, waving his fists at the skylight. Through the glass, Gussie was staring down. His eyes were bulging and his mouth was open, giving him so striking a resemblance to some rare fish in an aquarium that one's primary impulse was to offer him an ant's egg. Watching this fist-waving cook and this goggling guest, I must say that my sympathies were completely with the former. I considered him thoroughly justified in waving all the fists he wanted to. Review the facts, I mean to say. There he'd been, lying in bed, thinking idly of whatever French cooks do think about when in bed, and he'd suddenly become aware of that frightful face at the window, a thing to jar the most phlegmatic. I know I should hate to be lying in bed and have Gussie popping up like that. A chap's bedroom, you can't get away from it, is his castle, and he's every right to look askance if gargoyles come glaring in at him. While I stood musing thus, Aunt Dahlia, in her practical way, was coming straight to the point. "What is all this?" Anatole did a sort of Swedish exercise, starting at the base of the spine, carrying on through the shoulder blades, and finishing up among the back hair. Then he told her. In the chats I've had with this wonder man, I've always found his English fluent, but a bit on the mixed side. If you remember, he was with Mrs. Bingo Little for a time before coming to Brinkley, and no doubt he picked up a good deal from Bingo. Before that, he'd been a couple of years with an American family at Nice, and had studied under their chauffeur, one of the Maloneys of Brooklyn. So, what with Bingo and what with Maloney, he is, as I say, fluent, but a bit mixed. He spoke, in part, as follows. "Doug, you ask me what is it? Listen.
Make some attention a little. Me, I have hit the hay, but I do not sleep so good. And presently I wake up and I look, and there is one who make faces against me through the dashed window. Is that a pretty affair? Is that convenient? If you think I like it, you jolly well mistake yourself. I'm so mad as a wet hen. And why not? I'm somebody, isn't it? This is a bedroom. What? Not a house for some apes? Then for what do blatters sit on my window so cool as a few cucumbers making some faces?
Quite, I said. Dashed reasonable was my verdict. He threw another look up at Gussie and did exercise 2. The one where you clutch the moustache, give it a tug, and then start catching flies.
Wait, yet a little. I'm not finished. I say I see this type on my window making a few faces. But what, then? Does he buzz off when I shout a cry? And leave me peaceable? Not on your life. Here a man planted there, not giving any damns, and sit regarding me like a cat watching a duck. He make faces against me, and again he make faces against me, and the more I command that he should go the hell out of here, the more he do not get the hell out of here. He cries something toward me, and I demand what is his desire, but he do not explain. Oh no, that arrives never. He does but shrug his head. What damn silliness! Is this amusing for me? You think I like it? I am not content with such folly. I think the poor mutt is loony. Je me fiche de ce type infect. C'est idiot de faire comme ça, sale oiseau. Allez-vous-en, loufier. Tell les boobs to go away. He is mad as some marchateurs. I must say, I thought he was making out a jolly good case, and evidently Aunt Dahlia felt the same. She laid a quivering hand on his shoulder. "I will, Monsieur Anatole, I will," she said. And I couldn't have believed that robust voice capable of sinking to such an absolute coo. More like a turtle dove calling to its mate than anything else. "It's quite all right." She had said the wrong thing. He did exercise 3. All right? No. The hell you say it's all right? What used to pull stuff like that? Wait 1/2 moment. Not quite so quick, my old sport. It is by no means all right. See, yet again, a little... It is some very different fishes of fish. I take a few smooths with a rough, it is true, but I do not find it agreeable when one play larks against me on my windows. They cannot do a nice thing. No! I am a serious man. I do not wish a few larks on my windows. I enjoy larks on my windows worse as any. It is very little all right. If such running as is to arrive, I do not remain any longer in his house. No more. I buzz off. I do not say planted. Sinister words, I had to admit. And I wasn't surprised that Aunt Dahlia, hearing them, should have uttered a cry like the wail of a master of hounds seeing a fox shot. Anatole had begun to wave his fists again at Gussie, and she now joined him. Seppings, who was puffing respectfully in the background, didn't actually wave his fists, but he gave Gussie a pretty austere look. It was plain to the thoughtful observer that this Finknottle, in getting onto that skylight, had done a mistaken thing. He couldn't have been more unpopular in the home of G.G. Simmons. "Go away, you crazy loon!" cried Aunt Dahlia in that ringing voice of hers, which had once caused nervous members of the Quorn to lose stirrups and take tosses from the saddle. Gussie's reply was to waggle his eyebrows. I could read the message he was trying to convey. "I think he means," I said, reasonable old Bertram, always trying to throw oil on the troubled W's, "that if he does, he will fall down the side of the house and break his neck." "Well, why not?" said Aunt Dahlia. I could see her point, of course, but it seemed to me that there might be a nearer solution. This skylight happened to be the only window in the house which Uncle Tom hadn't festooned with his bally bars. I suppose he felt that if a burglar had the nerve to climb up as far as this, he deserved what was coming to him. If you opened the skylight, he could jump in. The idea got across. "Seppings, how does this skylight open?" "With a pole, madam." "Then get a pole.
Get 2 poles, 10! And presently Gussie was mixing with the company. Like one of those chaps you read about in the papers, the wretched man seemed deeply conscious of his position. I must say Aunt Dahlia's bearing and demeanour did nothing to assist towards a restored composure. Of the amiability which she'd exhibited when discussing this unhappy chump's activities with me over the fruit salad, no trace remained, and I wasn't surprised that speech more or less froze on the Finknuttle lips. It isn't often that Aunt Dahlia, normally as genial a bird as ever encouraged a gaggle of hounds to get their noses down to it, lets her angry passions rise, but when she does, strong men climb trees and pull them up after them. "Well," she said. In answer to this, all that Gussie could produce was a sort of strangled hiccup. "Well?" Aunt Dahlia's face grew darker. Hunting, if indulged in regularly over a period of years, is a pastime that seldom fails to lend a fairly deepish tinge to the patient's complexion, and her best friends couldn't have denied that even at normal times the relative's map tended a little towards the crushed strawberry. But never had I seen it take on so pronounced a richness as now. She looked like a tomato, struggling for self-expression. "Well?" Gussie tried hard, and for a moment it seemed as if something was going to come through, but in the end it turned out nothing more than a sort of death rattle. "Oh, take him away, Bertie, and put ice on his head," said Aunt Dahlia, giving the thing up. And she turned to tackle what looked like the rather man-sized job of soothing Anatole, who was now carrying on a muttered conversation with himself in a rapid sort of way. Seeming to feel that the situation was one to which he couldn't do justice in Bingo-cum-Maloney Anglo-American, he'd fallen back on his native tongue. Words like marmiton de dommage, pignouf, boulerboulou, and roustisseur were fluttering from him like bats out of a barn. Lost on me, of course, because, though I sweated a bit at the Gallic language during that Cannes visit, I'm still more or less in the est que vous avez stage. I regretted this, for they sounded good. I assisted Gussie down the stairs. A cooler thinker than Aunt Dahlia, I'd already guessed the hidden springs and motives which had led him to the roof. Where she'd seen only a cockeyed reveller indulging himself in a drunken prank or whimsy, I'd spotted the hunted fawn. "Was Tuppy after you?" I asked sympathetically. What I believe is called a frisson shook him. "He nearly got me on the top landing. Shinned out through a passage window and scrambled along a sort of ledge." "That baffled him, what?" "Yes, but then I found I'd stuck. The roof sloped down in all directions. I couldn't go back. I had to go on, crawling along this ledge. And then I found myself looking down the skylight." "Who was that chap?" "That was Anatole, Aunt Dahlia's chef." "French?" "To the core." "That explains why I couldn't make him understand. What asses these Frenchmen are. They don't seem able to grasp the simplest thing. You'd have thought if a chap saw a chap on a skylight, the chap would realize that the chap wanted to be let in. But no, he just stood there." "Waving a few fists?" "Yes, silly idiot. Still, here I am." "Here you are, yes, for the moment. I was thinking that Tuppy is probably lurking somewhere." He leaped like a lamb in springtime. "What shall I do?" "I consider this. Sneak back to your room and barricade the door. That is the manly policy." "Suppose that's where he's lurking?" "In that case, move elsewhere." But on arrival at the room, it transpired that Tuppy, if anywhere, was infesting some other portion of the house. Gussie shot in, and I heard the key turn, and feeling that there was no more that I could do in that quarter, I returned to the dining room for further fruit salad and a quiet think. And I'd barely filled my plate when the door opened and Aunt Dahlia came in. She sank into a chair, looking a bit shop-worn. "Give me a drink, Bertie." "What sort?" "Any sort, so long as it's strong." Approach Bertram Wooster along these lines, and you catch him at his best. St. Bernard dogs doing the square thing by Alpine travellers couldn't have bustled about more assiduously. I filled the order, and for some moments nothing was to be heard but the sloshing sound of an aunt restoring her tissues. "Shove it down, Aunt Dahlia," I said sympathetically. These things take it out of one, don't they? You've had a toughish time, no doubt, soothing Anatole. I proceeded, helping myself to anchovy paste on toast. Everything pretty smooth now, I trust? She gazed at me in a long, lingering sort of way, her brow wrinkled as if in thought. "Attila," she said at length. "That's the name. Attila the Hun. I was trying to think who you reminded me of. Somebody who went about strewing ruin and desolation and breaking up homes, which until he came along had been happy and peaceful. Attila is the man." "It's amazing," she said, drinking me in once more. "To look at you, one would think you were just an ordinary sort of amiable idiot, certifiable perhaps, but quite harmless. Yet in reality you're a worse scourge than the Black Death. I tell you, Bertie, when I contemplate you, I seem to come up against all the underlying sorrow and horror of life with such a thud that I feel as if I'd walked into a lamp-post." Pained and surprised, I would have spoken. But the stuff I'd thought was anchovy paste had turned out to be something far more gooey and adhesive. It seemed to wrap itself around the tongue and impede utterance like a gag. And while I was still endeavouring to clear the vocal cords for action, she went on. "Do you realise what you started when you sent that spink bottle man down here? As regards his getting blotto and turning the prize-giving ceremonies at Market Snodsbury Grammar School into a sort of too-real comic film, I will say nothing, for frankly I enjoyed it. But when he comes leering at Anatole through skylights just after I had with infinite pains and tact induced him to withdraw his notice, and makes him so temperamental that he won't hear of staying on after tomorrow—" The paste stuff gave way. I was able to speak. "What?" "Yes, Anatole goes tomorrow, and I suppose poor old Tom will have indigestion for the rest of his life. And that is not all. I've just seen Angela, and she tells me that she's engaged to this bottle." "Temporarily, yes," I had to admit. "Temporarily be blowed! She's definitely engaged to him, and talks with a sort of hideous coolness of getting married in October. So, there it is. If the prophet Job were to walk into the room at this moment, I could sit swapping hard-luck stories with him till bedtime. Not that Job was in my class." "He had boils." "Well, what are boils? A dashed painful, I understand." "Nonsense. I'd take all the boils on the market in exchange for my troubles." "Can't you realise the position? I've lost the best cook in England, my husband, poor soul, will probably die of dyspepsia, and my only daughter, for whom I dreamed such a wonderful future, is engaged to be married to an inebriated newt fancier. And you talk about boils?" I corrected her on a small point. "I don't absolutely talk about boils. I merely mentioned that Job had them. Yes, I agree with you, Aunt Dahlia, that things aren't looking too oojar-come-spiff at the moment, but be of good cheer. A Wooster is seldom baffled for more than a nonce." "You rather expect to be coming along shortly with another of your schemes?" "At any minute." She sighed resignedly. "I thought as much. Well, it needed but this. I don't see how things could possibly be worse than they are, but no doubt you'll succeed in making them so. Your genius and insight will find the way. Carry on, Bertie, yes, carry on. I'm past caring now. I shall even find a faint interest in seeing into what darker and profounder abysses of hell you can plunge this home. Go to it, lad. What's that stuff you're eating?" "I find it a little difficult to classify. Some sort of paste on toast, rather like a glue flavoured with beef extract." "Gimme," said Aunt Dahlia listlessly. "Be careful how you chew," I advised. "It sticketh closer than a brother. Yes, Jeeves?" The man had materialized on the carpet, absolutely noiseless as usual. "A note for you, sir." "A note for me, Jeeves?" "A note for you, sir." "From whom, Jeeves?" "From Miss Bassett, sir." "From whom, Jeeves?" "From Miss Bassett, sir." "From Miss Bassett, Jeeves?" "From Miss Bassett, sir." At this point, Aunt Dahlia, who'd taken one nibble at her whatever it was on toast and laid it down, begged us, a little fretfully I thought, for heaven's sake to cut out the cross-talk vaudeville stuff, as she had had enough to bear already without having to listen to us doing our imitation of the two Macs. Always willing to oblige, I dismissed Jeeves with a nod, and he flickered for a moment and was gone. Many a spectre would have been less slippy. But what, I mused, toying with the envelope, can this female be writing to me about? Why not open the damn thing and see? A very excellent idea, I said, and did so. If you're interested in my movements, proceeded Aunt Dahlia, heading for the door, I propose to go to my room, do some yogi deep breathing, and try to forget. Quite, I said absently, skimming page 1. And then, as I turned over, a sharp howl broke from my lips, causing Aunt Dahlia to shy like a startled mustang. "Don't do it!" she exclaimed, quivering in every limb. "Yes, but dash it! What a pest you are, you miserable object," she sighed. "I remember years ago when you were in your cradle, being left alone with you one day, and you nearly swallowed your rubber comforter and started turning purple, and I, ass that I was, took it out and saved your life. Let me tell you, young Bertie, it will go very hard with you if you ever swallow a rubber comforter again when only I am by to aid." "But dash it," I cried, "do you know what's happened? Madeline Bassett says she's going to marry me." "I hope it keeps fine for you," said the relative, and passed from the room looking like something out of an Edgar Allan Poe story.